We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws, we enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is May 25th, 2016. I was like, I had to stop for a minute there. There's too many fives today, being it the 25th of May. And we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, and SoundCloud, and the next day on Stitcher. And I apologize, as yesterday we actually, because I was doing some testing for the new show that we have coming in the next couple weeks or so, as I announced yesterday, Ellen Ball will be doing her own show. She'll be coming back to the network, but this time she will be hosting her own show as opposed to co-hosting on Nonpartisan Liberty for All. But I was doing some testing and I didn't put the settings back, and the show yesterday didn't go out live. It went out as private, so nobody could hear it when I was broadcasting live, and I didn't realize that till after the show was over. But it is out there for everyone to listen to. You can go to any of the applications, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Tumblr, YouTube, and listen to the show. We talked a lot about opium on yesterday's show and the propaganda that mainly you get from all government media, but specifically I was talking about this show called Drugs, Inc., which is from either the History Channel or National Geographic or one of those. I think they're all part of the same family of channels. So we talked a lot about that and how essentially they want to blame everything on the doctors. It's all the doctor's fault, and really it's the government, in my opinion. Part of the responsibility obviously is the person, but it's also, if you want to blame anybody, it's the government that are the ones by keeping drugs illegal. Tonight, Ken Schortgen is going to be with us, but before I bring Ken on, and actually maybe I can just bring him on and get his opinion on this story before we get into geopolitics and the economy. There was a story I came across regarding, again, because there's a lot of stories in the past few years like this, people that they're calling essentially terrorists. People have made fun of them and called them Al-Qaeda and Vanilla ISIS, like they're a, mostly white rednecks or something like that, or rural groups, which I don't think is the case, because I agree with them to a certain extent, although they're mainly constitutionalist. So let me bring Ken on, and if he wants to chime in, he can chime in on this as well. And then I'm sure there's a lot of things going on. A lot still going on with gold, I know, which probably will be going on for a long time to come, and other stories as well. So, Ken, thanks as always for joining us.
Evening, Dave. Pleasure to be here.
So I know we usually just, if I talk about a story, I'll you know talk about it in the beginning before I bring you on, but I figured I'd bring you on and get your opinion on this as well, and which I'm sure you have one. Essentially, and I don't know if you came across this story, probably not. It was in Drudge a couple days ago, but there's been similar stories in the past where the federal government is criticizing any groups that are considered militias or extremist or anti-government groups, like what happened at the Bundy Ranch and what happened in Oregon. And of course, they bring in their partners, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has done actual training, scary fucking training, because I've played the training videos where, you know, if you're a cop and you're a rookie cop and you come in and you watch one of these videos, I mean, they make it seem like the majority of Americans, you got to be scared that if you pull them over, they're going to fucking kill you. And the amount of cops that get killed are so small. I mean, that actually get killed by other people. You know, there's car accidents. Even that's small. Even as a total, it's small. But if you actually take the amount of cops that get killed by other people, you have more that get killed in car accidents than even, I'm talking on the job, than that get killed by other people. And then you have, you know, of course, cops that get killed by, you know, they're running after a suspect or something like that, that has nothing to do with any of these groups. I mean, the amount of cops that get killed by so-called extremist militia groups is, you know, maybe the average, and this is average, and maybe one a year or something like that if you were to take the totals from, you know, the past 10 years. It's not a lot, but they propagandize it like it's a normal thing, which is scary because it puts these ideas in the cops' heads and they're trigger happy enough already. Then you got them, you know, coming out and seeing videos like that. It's scary, but they're calling them terrorists, and they're saying that they're more of a danger than groups like ISIS and Muslim terrorists and all of that. And a lot of it, of course, they point to Obama. They go through what happened at Ruby Ridge and what happened at Oklahoma City in retaliation, supposedly, which I think, and this is based on information of somebody I know that was part of the militia movement, that was totally a false flag event. But that's a whole nother story. But what happened in Waco, and which I don't know if if people even remember some of those things that happened in the 90s with what happened at Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. But mainly, it's just another article warning people, hey, you have all of these people that are out there that are extremist, and the government needs to keep an eye on them, and they're anti-government, and they could attack the government. They're preppers, they're this and that. So it's a long article, so I don't want to get into the whole thing, but I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about, and that there's been in the past few years a lot of articles like this, and of course the Southern Poverty Law Center links it to racism and goes back to 2008 and says, well, since 2008, there used to be, say, 100 groups, now there's 1,000 groups and all of that stuff. And I think, if anything, that may be the case as a reaction to Obama, but not because he was black, because of his policies, that he came out as what they viewed as a socialist. And a lot of people got nervous about that, and especially in the past 4 years, he's been coming after guns, or at least since his reelection.
Yeah, the thing about it is really it's simplistic. When you take all of these things into it, they use terms to program the people. When they mean government, they mean their oligarchy establishment. The system that they put into place that supersedes what the government was ever supposed to be under the Constitution. Right. And it's more of a corporatocracy. Okay. Everything that's done today is to protect the corporatocracy. Now, here's the interesting thing. Recently there was a Syrian, quote, rebel who has ties to Al-Qaeda, who was in Washington talking with one of the I don't know if it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but it's one of those generals who is a planner, and he's retiring. But he was there discussing how upset they are because the poor Syrian rebels have been destroyed. The Russians took care of that along with ISIS, and they're trying to see about getting another $500 million or whatever to train some more to try to get Assad out. So here's the thing. ISIS was a CIA, Mossad, MI6 creation.
Right.
The Syrian rebels were those same ones in Libya during Benghazi who took out Gaddafi, and then they stopped in Benghazi, got the arms, moved up to Syria. They're just a bunch of Arabs not affiliated with any states that call themselves rebels for whatever price. They're mercenaries.
Well,
the thing is, the establishment controls both of those. The establishment does not control militia groups within the United States.
But
that's why they're the enemies, and Al-Qaeda and Syrian rebels and ISIS are not the enemies.
Just real quick, they've even admitted, I saw a documentary, or it was a report of ISIS fighters in Afghanistan. And they were talking to some of them, and they were saying, why are you fighting for ISIS? And one of the guys said straight up, and I don't know how many this is the case with, it might be the case with the majority. He said, because I can't make this much money working whatever he was working. That was why. He didn't give a fuck about the whole, Muslim thing or caliphate or any of that shit. He's like, they pay me more.
Well, yeah. And the thing about it is, in the Middle East is similar to, like the United States. There's a 1% that has all the money, and there's 45 to 50% that are dirt poor. In the Middle East, it's the same way. You have the House of Saud, you have the imams, you have the clerics, the religious classes. They have all the money. The rest, 90 to 95%, are dirt poor. So if you don't have a job and you're under this, don't have any prospects of a future, and they tell you, hey, come fight with us, and we'll pay you $500 a day, and we're getting funded by the West. We're getting funded by Turkey when we sell our oil that we steal over there, and they all got white Nike shoes and Toyota trucks. You wonder where those come from?
Yeah, because the U.S. is paying the money. And so, I mean, how many do you think, based on what or how many, just your opinion, how how many of these fighters, because I would say probably more than less, the majority, now maybe not a huge majority, but I would say a majority, are fighting, for the paycheck, and how many actually believe in this shit? Because the leaders I know are the ones associated with the CIA. Then you have, the foot soldiers, and how many of them are really fighting for some kind of ideology, and how many are really just fighting for the fucking paycheck?
Oh, I would say a large majority are for the ideology, because you got to remember, a lot of them that came from Europe when they all joined ISIS, that came, France has a huge Muslim population in Paris. Britain has a huge population.
Yeah, they do
Denmark.
now, since like the past.
No, they've had
5,
them since
10
the
years?
70s.
Have
in
they
the
had it that long?
1970s, there was a thing that was passed in the early days of the European Union, the Arab immigration thing. And so France, which had always been at war with Algeria, they opened up so that they could move across with visas. And there was a huge migration in the 70s of Arabs into Europe.
But I even thought in the past 10 years, too, that it's also again went up recently. And I could be wrong about that, but I thought...
well, it's been with the refugee crisis, but...
Not with the recent refugee crisis, but I'm saying even before that, like in the past, since like 2000 or...
It's more birth rate issue. The birth rates for the white Europeans has, either been flat or negative, has been declining. But each of these, Muslim families has, 2 to 5 to 6 kids. And so over the course of 20 years, you're going to, double and double and double again. So, and the problem is that because they come from places that have extreme Wahhabism religion, the sect, as opposed to like Persia, which has a more moderate sect of Islam, the Shiite or the Ba'ath Party, like Iraq was. Most of these are from the Wahhabist nations like Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Chechnya, et cetera, and so they follow their clerics to the core. And if the clerics say jihad, then they mindlessly from birth hate the Jew, hate the Christian, hate the European, hate the white man. Is jihad all the time. We're going to take over the world for Islam and for Allah, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's very easy when you've been trained from birth to do that all you got to do is say, hey, ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate needs you. Because that was one thing that sold, is ISIS wanted to build a caliphate. Well, Islam has been under a caliphate for most of its, since the 5th or 6th century. As a matter of fact, the Ottoman Empire, 100 years ago, when the Ottoman Empire was fighting for the Axis powers in World War I, that was a caliphate. It was the Ottoman Caliphate, or the Ottoman Empire, controlled by Turkey. So, this is the mindset of them. So the vast majority of those over there are religious fanatics, but many did come for the money. And why not? Because they take over the oil from Iraq and Syria and those parts. They got tons of ways of coercing people. It's no different than, did you ever hear the story about where the term assassins and paradise came from?
I don't recall.
When the Mohammedans, the followers of Muhammad, were taking over the Middle East, they fought with the Arab nations, the 12 tribes of, who was it? The first son of Abraham, Ishmael. Okay, the Mohammedans were fighting the 12 tribes of Ishmael to take over the Middle East during the 5th and 6th centuries. And the Mohammedans, one sect of them, had a bunch of warriors, and what they did is they drugged them, and then they took them while they were drugged to this one huge castle in this oasis, and it had palm trees, and it had fruit, and it had all these women, and it had this, and they lied to them, and they said, this is paradise, and they kept them there for 3 days. And then they drugged him again and took him back. And they told these warriors, if you die in battle, then you will go back to paradise. And that's where the whole philosophy of paradise comes from, was this concocted thing, this oasis castle that they started taking some of their warriors to. Well, what they also did is they fed them hashish when they went into battle so that they would be fearless and fight to the death. And they called them, I don't know the Arabic word, but the Arabic word is assassin. And that's where the original assassins came from. And it was their job mostly to go into the camps of the enemy and sneak at night and go into the tents of the leaders and assassinate the leaders. So this is, this whole thing about killing and takeover, and that's been forever, and it's part of their core.
Right. Well, now you have here, and they've been doing this for a while now, labeling these groups since the election of Obama. And of course, they keep bringing up, well, since the election of a black president, because they're trying to propagandize and say, well, these groups are racist and these groups are this and that they're dangerous. And really, I mean, they've even had documents that have gotten released that weren't supposed to. They were classified documents, talking about the same stuff. And I remember, talking about it, a year ago or so. And it's like they keep coming out with the same stuff and kind of pushing it. And this is from the Washington Post. And of course, they're straight up government media, and they're pushing this down people's throats, kind of, that yes, you have these militias out there and they're dangerous and they're racist, and ever since Obama got elected, they're out there. And
but you should not be surprised about this. Okay, the thing about it is we've had 25 years of political correctness take over the entire thing. They called the Tea Party racist. Well, you know what? There's a lot of blacks who were part of the Tea Party. So how racist can it be? No, it's called neuro-linguistic programming. Okay, they tried to, and it's interesting, I'm going to do a side note here. It's interesting. One, people are waking up to it. They can have a story like this, crying wolf. It's always the militia, or as Hillary Clinton used to say 20 some odd years ago, the right-wing conspiracy's out to get me.
Right. Yeah. Because they were saying it especially in the 90s, when Bill Clinton was president, was when a lot of this stuff went on. That's when, Waco, I believe. No, that was under Bush. But,
Waco and Oklahoma City were both under Clinton.
Were under Clinton. Okay. Yeah,
and Ruby Ridge was under Clinton. Janet Reno was the attorney general, and she ordered them. Hillary actually ordered Waco.
And, I know Oklahoma City was under Clinton. Right after that, same thing. They had a bill that they were waiting to pass, just like 9/11, that right after Oklahoma City, they passed that bill. It was, I don't remember the specifics. It's been a while, but
yeah, Oklahoma City was a farce, because scientists and engineers have a truck full of nitrates would not have blown off half the front of the building.
Yeah, you couldn't. It's not. No, there's so many holes in that.
They had wired that. It was a false flag. It was from and Terry Nichols was he was the fall guy, just like Sirhan. It was proven that Sirhan had a gun with only 6 shots in it, yet 13 were fired, and Robert Kennedy was killed from the back of his head.
Well, I had talked to one of the, I guess, founders of the militia movement, or maybe not founders, but that's kind of how he referred to himself. And you can actually look this up. It's under, I believe, PBS had documentation, and they have the calls made to his house by what's his name, the guy who supposedly did it. The
guy they put to death.
Yeah, that they had calls to his house and had him showing up at his house, and he never even had met him. And luckily for him, he was a junior, so they said it was actually his father's house, and he was living with his sister. So it kind of fucked them up. So basically, they lied in an FBI document or whatever where they're tracking his movements, saying that he was connected to him and all of this shit. So, I mean, even from that and from talking with him, and if you've ever watched the documentary A Noble Lie, it goes into a lot of other stuff too. It goes into a cop who showed up, was one of the first responders, ends up being, shot in the head, but they claimed it was a suicide, but he was also handcuffed, stabbed, all of these other things as well. So, yeah, I mean, that was totally a false flag, whether it was to get rid of documents that were in that building or to pass legislation that they passed, or both.
The Oklahoma City, the Murrow building was destroyed because it had all the skeletons for Waco.
Well, that's what I just said. If it was to get rid of documentation, or whatever that was in that building,
right.
or
and this is also one of the reasons why Eric Holder has funneled around all these administrations.
Right, he was involved in that. He was a deputy attorney general.
Correct.
At that time.
The reason they keep him in there is because he knows all where the dead bodies are, and so they don't mess with Eric Holder, because Eric Holder could very easily bring all of them to prison. He knows everything.
Well, either way, I don't think anybody would
and the thing about
go
it is,
to prison anyway. So
people need to stop thinking about government. It's no longer a government. It's an oligarchy. Harvard University did a study with Stanford 2 years ago, and they said we are no longer a republic. We're no longer a democracy. We are an oligarchy. This means that a small group of people with the corporations pretty much run the country.
Well, I think that's been happening for at least not long from after the beginning of the government. I really and no doubt at least 100 years, but I think even longer than that.
Well, things started changing after the Civil War.
Civil
War is when things became federalized.
But again, I mean, you have the whiskey, rebellion. Right away. I mean, essentially, it's like, and I've said this before, and I say it all the time. I believe that government is inherently evil.
Yeah, but even the Constitution,
once you pass
Constitution gives Congress the right to tax, and it was about a group of immigrants, Scotch-Irish, who were not used to had come over and not used to having money. So they couldn't pay the tax. All they did is they used to barter and trade in whiskey. That's what they did. They never used currency. They just bartered and traded in whiskey. And, they said, well, we don't have any money. We can't do it, because they never sold their whiskey to anybody outside of the Scotch-Irish community. And so they decided to do this protest. And, obviously they came in and there wasn't a lot of shots fired. It was just, one big hoopla. But what it did was, tons of these Scotch-Irish decided, screw this, we're going to move to the territories. And that's when they filtered down from Pennsylvania into Tennessee and Kentucky. And those were territories at the time.
Well,
that's why you have Tennessee bourbon and Kentucky bourbon, is because the Scotch-Irish moved down there.
Well, either way, what gives the government the right to tax? Because the
Constitution does.
What is the Constitution? A piece of paper that a bunch of
that's the states,
oligarchs wrote up.
But
not everybody agreed to the Constitution. The states are not people, they are entities, and not everybody agreed to it. So they they claimed their right to tax, And, again, from the beginning of any government, it's taking away, taking control and continuing to take that control.
Story.
So
if there's no taxing, then how in the hell do you defend the country? How in the hell do you create the roads? How in the hell do you do anything that outside the states? If the states can't tax, then they have no schools, they have no education, no.
Well, I don't think there should be any government schools anyway.
They have no sewage systems. They have no electrical systems.
Well, not true. I mean, that's just if the government doesn't pay for it, then it won't happen, not based on a voluntary system.
The government was originally built with limited government, with the states having the thing. Now, here's the problem.
It was not
the states
really
and the people themselves chose to give up their sovereignty to the federal government. We can blame the government, usurping in. But
there was no sovereignty. Because if there was sovereignty, every single person did not agree to the Constitution. No, you had the elite.
Not everybody's going to agree to anything in life.
Right. So that means things were forced on people without their consent, and they continue to be. It doesn't matter how you want to, sugarcoat it. Bottom line is government is inherently evil.
We can wish the way something is.
Well, we'll leave it at
now. Deal with what
at this and move on, because I know there's a lot of other stuff to talk about. But my definition of a government is that government is inherently evil. It's about power, control, and money, and nobody consents unless you are one of the writers of the Constitution or one of the people that voted on it. You did not consent to give them any of your money or any of this shit. So I know there's a lot going on still with gold. I noticed that you still have a lot of articles with gold and things that are going on. I don't know if you want to talk about that first, but also there's the illegal aliens that are, or whatever you want to call them,
illegal aliens. That's what they are.
But
political correctness does not have any place in my house.
I don't believe in political correctness, but I also don't believe in borders neither. So, but whatever. But I don't believe in welfare neither. That's the problem. So you have. I guess we can talk about this first if you want, that illegals are getting more in benefits than people that live in the U.S. legally are. And the thing with that, I would say right away, no matter what you believe, whether you believe in open borders or not, that you have people that are paying into the system that are giving money to people that never paid into the system.
Well, yeah, I mean that. So, see, Social Security originally in the 1936, I believe, it was originally done because
it's a ripoff. But
yeah, okay, hold on. We're in a Great Depression. Okay, we almost went communist in the 1930s. That was a big movement because people saw that capitalism, quote unquote, had failed, even though capitalism didn't fail. Crony capitalism had failed.
Right, because you already had the Fed and
Wall Street and the stock market and all that, the banks. But here's the thing: 1936, there was hardly any jobs, and so what are you going to do with a bunch of people who are in their 50s and 60s? Who don't have retirement because the stock market crashed and the banks were closing and they lost their farms and their homes. So all these 50 and 60-year-olds are going to be fighting with the 20s, 30s, and 40s trying to get jobs that aren't there. So they came up with a scheme of insurance, retirement insurance, so primarily to keep those who are 50s and 60 in their 50s and 60s out of the workforce, so that the remaining jobs could be garnered by the younger people.
Right, which makes sense, but they could have done it on a temporary type basis.
Well, to be honest, the whole system was built before World War II, and it was after World War II that really screwed it up, and I'll explain why. There was a certain population that was out there, plus the fact that before World War II, the average age, that people lived in the United States was about 52, 53 years old. So if you did have a form of Social Security, you weren't going to pay out for a whole long time.
Not to interrupt, but just to clarify, back then, was it still 65 was the age? Or
No.
what was the age back when they started it?
I believe the age was 50.
Oh, okay, then that makes a lot more sense then.
Yeah. No. You know what? A very, very small part of the population lived to be 65, 70, 75.
Yeah, well, that's why that's why I was asking, because you were just saying that. So I'm like, well, if no one's living that long, then what purpose did it serve?
Exactly.
But yeah, that makes sense if people were living
here's
to
what
50.
ended up happening. You had your workers 20s, 30s, and 40s. They were paying into the system. It was enough to support those who were 50 and 60 and even 70 years old, but they didn't last in their 80s, 90s, and that.
How did they? Not to interrupt, but this is actually an interesting topic. But how did they roll this out? So, you have, I guess, they came up with the idea. I'm sure they passed a bill through Congress, but how did it work back then, and how did it roll?
Okay, here's what it first happened.
And
they appropriated a certain amount of money to get it started, and started the checks going out. And it was with the Social Security Act, that's when they also passed the payroll tax, so that taxes like FICA and, there wasn't Medicare yet. That came in the late 60s.
Well, payroll tax was in 1913.
No, the income tax.
Income tax, right.
Right. And by the way, when the income tax first came out, less than 1% of the people actually paid into it.
Yeah, I know that it was like it wasn't voluntary, but it's like it almost was.
It was
like
the
small amount.
The parameters for paying the income tax were so huge. I mean, at a time when people were making about $2,500 a year, you had to make like $20,000 a year or more to pay any income tax.
Yeah, and I know the percentage at first was very, very low as well, because I actually went through one day. I wonder if I still have it. I went through the whole history of the highest percentage of income tax, and wrote it down year by year. And, of course, about how in the 60s at one point it was about 90%, but I don't know how many people actually paid that.
I'll explain that in a second.
Like I think probably from deductions and stuff like that no one really paid that.
The rich don't have incomes. The rich hold assets, okay? So they only pay capital gains tax. They don't actually get incomes from a job. So paying 90% on incomes, that's how you get Warren Buffett paying a smaller percentage than his secretary does.
But because she has a job. They use that. It's fucked up because they'll use that now when they talk about income tax. They'll use it as propaganda and say, oh, well, back, in 19 whatever year it was, like 62 or something, the income tax rate, the highest rate was 90%. And it should go back to that. So they distort the facts.
Right, but the whole thing was about. See, the only reason the income tax got passed anyway is it was during the Progressive era, from 1900 to 1920, and there were some good things that came out of the Progressive era. One, there was, I think, it started out as a 45-hour work week. Eventually, went down to 40. You had 6-day work weeks.
But a lot of that could have happened on its own by people.
Children. There were no child.
I know all the child labor laws. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that they passed now is, I think, is a negative in a lot of ways.
Well,
Some
what
of the
ended up
stuff
happening was something that started out, not exactly the best, but with good intentions, and it wasn't harmful. Over time, men in power, will always corrupt it. And and getting back to the Social Security thing. Okay. What really screwed up the Social Security was after World War II, all the GIs coming back, they started having big families. And what was that era known as? The baby boom.
Well, it's also a ripoff too, because you could take that money and invest it and make more money than what you get back.
Yeah, but we'll get that in a second. If we want to follow the chain here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the baby boom. Now, obviously, at the beginning, there was they didn't have to receive Social Security, but when they turned 18 and 20 and 30, you had the largest generation in American history, all productive and working. And of course, during the 50s and 60s, America was, an economic marvel. So everybody had a job. Everybody was making a decent income. The higher incomes, the wages were going up. So the Social Security fund was just accumulating. So you had the baby boomers for their entire time working, and they were putting in tons and tons and tons of money. In the 1970s, a congressman decided, this was during Carter's stagflation. The economy was slowing down. The government was in debt after Vietnam. They wanted money. So they said, we're going to move Social Security funds, trust fund. We're going to start moving that into the general fund, and we're going to replace it with treasury bonds. Okay. So they get away with saying, well, bonds are paying 3%, 4%, 5%. So we're giving them a bonus, but really it's debt. When the government makes a treasury bond, they take that treasury bond to the Fed lends them the money for the bond. It's debt. Just like the dollar, ever since 1971 off the gold standard, every dollar that's created, a treasury bond is created, sent to the Fed cashes it, debt. Right. Debt-based money. Well, you're putting debt-based money or debt into the Social Security fund. And this started about 1976, 77. What also then happened was, since we had a Democratic Congress and we had a Democratic president, they were trying to appease and appeal to everybody. So they said, we got to make a fund for the disabled and for children of widows and whatever. We're going to use the Social Security fund to pay that too. So suddenly disabled goes into, starts taking money out of the Social Security fund that was specifically supposed to be retirement only. So that starts getting diluted. And then came the Bill Clinton years. And Bill Clinton loves to tell you that he balanced the budget. Well, you know how he balanced the budget? He took $3 trillion from the Social Security fund, all that was remaining separated in the trust fund. He put it in the general fund to balance the budget. And so there's nothing in there. And the way you know that nothing is in there is because the last time there was going to be a government shutdown, I think it was October of 2014. The big thing, Congress, Boehner against, I think it was last year. Boehner against Obama, against Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary. The Treasury Secretary came out and said, if we don't have if we have a government shutdown, then we might not be able to afford to pay out Social Security payments. What? Social Security payments? There should be $3 trillion in there. And for him to even say that means that there's no money. that right now they are doing a combination of the taxes that come out of your payroll every 2 weeks or every month has to be subsidized with creation of more debt. That's how the Ponzi scheme is over. They have to create new debt just to pay the current payees.
I thought that they never put the Social Security money into a fund. I thought they used it from day one.
No. It was separate, just like the Fed. Okay, when the Federal Reserve Act was created in 1913. One of the rules under the Fed by Congress was the Federal Reserve cannot buy U.S. bonds. That way, that was to separate the private bank, the Federal Reserve, from the government. Because what happens when you have a chance that a private bank's going to buy your bonds? Then all these greedy congressmen say, ooh, I can get a bunch of money from my pet projects and keep getting elected in office. We'll just keep selling bonds to the Fed. They'll monetize them, and we'll just spend the money like, and that's the problem. Because these people in Congress don't earn the money, they don't have any concept of fiscal responsibility.
Well, that's what they ended up doing.
In 1917, they then passed a new resolution that the Federal Reserve could buy U.S. Sovereign bonds.
It only took them 4 years. So I'm sure in the beginning
they did it for
that was the plan.
They did it for the war. That's why they primarily did it. And had they removed it after the war was done, then, okay, that would have been fine. But, of course, they don't. When something gets passed, it never gets retracted. And so that began the stage of the government selling bonds to the, paying interest on money.
But that might have been part of the whole initial plan anyway, of changing the law during the war and just never changing it back.
Actually, no. From what I've read of the original Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve was supposed to be for private banks only. It was they had 3 mandates. They had 3 mandates, and this is the reason why they had 12 different districts. Okay, because around the country, economies in different areas of the United States were much different. In the Midwest, you don't have a lot of you have farming. So there's price. This is the reason why if you go to New York City and you buy a bottle of water, it's like $8. But if you go to to Las Vegas, a bottle of water might be $1.50 to $2. Is because the economies all around the country are different. This is why house prices in California and New York are much different than house prices in Omaha, Nebraska. And there were 12 districts, and back then they didn't have one single Federal Reserve branch make interest rates for everybody. Every single one of those 12 set the interest rates, the discount rates for each area. Okay. Eventually, of course, corrupt individuals pushed it into the New York Fed, and the New York Fed runs everything now. But when these things were started out, the federal government had little to do with the Federal Reserve except for the Federal Reserve set the interest rates. So the New York Fed set the interest rates for Wall Street and for Washington when it came to borrowing money. The other thing that they were supposed to do is they were supposed to mandate employment. And by mandating employment, what they would do is they would lower the interest rate so that money was easier for corporations and banks and small business to borrow to boost up, create jobs and grow the economy. And then when inflation and prices started getting too high, that's when they raised the cost of borrowing money so that these businesses wouldn't borrow so much and it would slow down and prices would level off. This was the Federal Reserve was initially supposed to be the lender of last resort for private banks, had nothing to do with the federal government. It was only Congress, and probably Congress being owned by, the lobbyists. This is why we had Glass-Steagall during the Great Depression. Glass-Steagall, which said that there would be no more Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs goes back to the Great Depression era too.
The commercial, I didn't know it had been around that long, but the commercial side of the bank was separate from the investment side of the bank.
So it's
until
like
the 90s, all the way from then until the 90s.
You would go to a broker like Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns. What was the other one? Smith Barney. We make money the old-fashioned way. We earn it. These are investment banks. That means that you are speculating with your money. If you lose it, you lose it. Commercial banks are the ones like your local credit unions,
right? And they give out
local
home
Bank
loans
of America,
and
or whatever. Those are your checking savings account, your CDs, and your borrowing, like mortgages for cars,
that's
mortgages
what I'm saying.
for that.
Home loans and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And those were supposed to be separate, so that if a bank failed, then it would have a limited amount of money, It
Well,
has
it would-
limited liabilities.
It would
and
be
was
harder
protected
to
by the
fail
FDIC.
too, right? Because it wouldn't be making risky investments.
Correct.
It would be making pretty solid investments there, as opposed to the risky investments that all these investment banks make. But then under Clinton, with what was the isn't he the Secretary of Treasury now, who was very involved in that? What's the guy who helped get that passed?
He's not Secretary of Treasury. It was actually Republicans in Congress who passed it and signed by Bill.
Yeah, but there was a guy who
it was called the Graham-Leach-Bailey Act,
who lobbied for it to get passed, who's been very involved in government.
Robert Rubin and Larry Summers.
Larry Summers is who I'm thinking of.
Both in the Treasury
right.
Department. Robert
exactly.
Rubin was the Treasury Secretary. Larry Summers was the Assistant Treasury Secretary.
And isn't Summers back in the government now? Isn't he the?
He's not back in the government, but he's chirping. No, Larry Summers is the president of Harvard University.
Okay, that's where he is now. But recently, I thought he was under the Obama administration at some point. I thought he was.
Yeah, but Obama's had economic councils. He had John Corzine as an economic counsel. He had Warren Buffett as his economic advisor. Yeah, Robert Rubin actually was more tied into. He was obviously with Clinton, but he was also with Bush. Now, one thing he did with George Bush Sr. is that George Bush Sr., while he was president, pushed through an act that pretty much stole a bunch of national parkland and funneled it to a mining interest, precious metal mining interest, that Bush pretty much controlled. And the other thing that they did is that Rubin and Bush and Clinton, you may have heard about the millions of tungsten bars. Yeah, they replaced all the gold in Fort Knox. What Rubin did was they got all these tungsten bars and they plated them with gold or painted them over with gold and they replaced them in. Then they took a big portion of our gold stash and they leased it out. Now, whenever you hear leased gold, here's what that means. That means it's been sold, but it's still in the books as if you have it. Okay? You're not getting it back, but they just call it lease and they sell it. And what they did was they leased all the gold. It crushed the gold price and it raised the bond price. And Robert Rubin did this with Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs made a monstrous fortune. And this is why when Robert Rubin came out, I think he joined Citigroup, and they pretty much gave him $100 million for helping them make hundreds of billions of dollars by selling our national gold. Yeah, the corruption is absolutely rank. And you see that today. Last week we had four different Fed presidents come out and all say, or try to say, oh yeah, June rate hike, but they didn't say that. They said June's a live meeting. It's a live meeting, and if economic conditions are that, we should have a hike. We're going to have 7 before 2017. They were just coming out and just rattling, jawboning bullshit. Okay, but here's the problem. Because they're Fed presidents, the dollar suddenly went from 92.5 to 95.5 in the course of 6 trading days. Gold price went from $12.85 down to $12.35, $12.40, what it is now. Why? Just them talking, what ended up happening? The computer algos, the high-frequency trading computers that are built to listen to news and instantly throw out 1 billion trades based on news, crushed gold, rose the dollar, and I guarantee you, I'm going to put money down that in June there will be no rate hike. They're going to come up with absolute bullshit. Well, the economic conditions we're holding off, but we're going to look in July and we're going to look in October. They talked in March of last year about rate hikes 8 different times before they finally did it a measly quarter point in December. And then what happened in January? The stock market was down the first 17 days of the year. Okay, they're not going to raise anything, but because they know that simply by talking something, the high frequency traders will do the work for them and move monetary policy, stocks, bonds, dollar, gold, any way they want. This is why China, Russia, and the BRICS are doing their best as fast as they can to de-dollarize and get out from the dollar system, because it's complete and utter manipulation.
Yeah, and I had noticed that you had another article about getting rid of a whole bunch of U.S. dollars. But before we get to that, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, let's talk more about, let's get to the illegals that are getting more money than Americans that live here legally, and then we can get to the other stuff as well. As I know, there's still more going on with gold and going on with countries trying to get rid of the dollar. So we're going to take a quick break. If you'd like to call in, you can call in at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can Skype in at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and just send the contact request with your name and what you want to talk about. And you can get all that information at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Along with all our social media, links to social media pages, and various archives as well. But if you want to find all of the archives we've ever done, you can find those at Spreaker.com, and you can find the exact link again at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. That's the easiest site to remember and to go to. And for Ken, you can go to the Daily Economist and get all of his articles on the economy and geopolitics, and there's a lot of important stuff going on there. You can also subscribe to his RSS feed. So we will be back after this. Nonpartisan Liberty for all.com.
It's not really the same as like smoking weed or drinking.
No.
Like it's so addictive. Like you can experiment a little bit and then you're addicted to it. And
is it okay to own people? Actually, it's more than okay. Everybody owns somebody because we all own ourselves. When you own something, you have the right to decide who else has access to it. If you own a bicycle, people who want to use your bicycle have to get your permission. And it's the same with your body. You can decide who has access to it. You have a right to say no. In other words, you own yourself. Now, this is a very simple idea, but it makes a big difference in our lives. Let's think about Fred. Fred needs a new wall, and he'd like to enlist the help of George, Sam, and Jill. Now, Fred gets a clever idea. Why not just stack them up and use them for a wall? Well, that's easy. George, Sam, and Jill are off limits. They've already been spoken for by themselves. They have a right to say no. But maybe Fred is still in luck, because as it happens, George can drive a truck, and Sam can carry heavy loads, and Jill can even lay bricks. So, maybe Fred has to leave their bodies alone, but can he use their abilities just whenever he wants and get his wall that way? Well, again, no. People own themselves. They have their own lives to live and their own choices to make. We can use tools just whenever we want, but we can't use people without their permission. People have a right to say no. Well, Fred's really clever, and he has a couple of other tricks up his sleeve. Maybe he could just wait until George, Sam, and Jill build a wall anyway and then come in and say it's his now. Or maybe he could let them go ahead and build their own wall and keep it, but only if they build another wall for him first. Would those things be okay? Well, the whole point of people having their own lives to live is that they get to make their own choices about what they want out of life and how they'll get it. George, Sam, and Jill chose to use their time and their energy to build a wall, to create something for their future. By just taking the wall, it's as if Fred forced them to work for him anyway, to work for his future instead. Now, a much better idea would be for Fred to offer George, Sam, and Jill something that they want in exchange for the wall that he wants. That would take their ownership of themselves seriously. It would treat them with basic decency, and it would let them all create more prosperous futures for themselves.
Hello, ma'am. Can you roll down the window?
George, it's outside.
Can you get it all the way down?
County.
Is that as far down as it goes?
Point on stable from 52050.
What's going on?
Can you roll down the window for my safety?
Why?
For my safety, because...
Roll the window all the way down?
Yes, ma'am.
Why?
Because I'm getting ready to have you sign a citation, ma'am, and I'm not going to reach into your vehicle. Okay. I'm gonna ask you one more time to roll down the window, please, ma'am.
What is the citation?
For unsafe equipment.
Why do you need the window all the way down? I'm talking
For my safety, because I'm going to be putting this...
right here.
My hand is going to be near the window, ma'am.
It doesn't need
Okay, step out of the vehicle. Step out of the vehicle. Step out of the vehicle.
I'm having a miscarriage. You're making my day a lot harder.
88, I need 44.
I'm bleeding almost to death. I need to go to the health clinic.
Okay,
I don't know
step out.
Why?
Step out of the vehicle. Open up.
59's around. 1040's on Green Park, adjacent to Silicon Valley. 2012.
Open the window.
2012.
If you don't open the window, I'm going to break the window. Ma'am.
At the racetrack, 4 sites, 50.
She's refusing to open the door or roll down the window.
Open the door.
Open the window.
What did I do?
Roll it down.
40 hours.
It will be broken. It doesn't need to be.
Ma'am, if you do not roll down the window all the way.
I'm recording.
Ma'am, I'm recording it also on this camera. I need you to roll down the window all the way. Then step out of the vehicle. Step out of the vehicle.
What is the law that I have to have?
The law is that I'm asking, you are detained right now. You are detained right now, and you need to get out of the vehicle.
I'm calm. What is the law?
Get out of the vehicle. The law is you are being detained right now because for a traffic infraction. You are being detained for a traffic infraction. Step out of the vehicle. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. Step out of the vehicle.
Subject at racetrack, 4 Colonial.
If you roll it up on my window.
Oh my God, are you serious? I have to go to the doctor.
Get out. Get out of the car right now.
Oh my God.
Get out of the car right now. Get out.
Wait.
Get out of the car. Get out of the vehicle.
I can get out.
Down on the ground. Get down on the ground.
Are you serious? You're scraping me.
Down on the ground.
This is not necessary. What did I do?
County Patrol 21.
What did I do? I
comply to lawful order.
asked him a question.
You are about to get resisting.
Why am I resisting? I'm not
No, you are getting charged with resistance right now.
Talking.
Stand up.
Okay, I'm talking. I have to go to the doctor.
Idiot on
I'm
1015.
having a miscarriage. I can't believe this. Why am I
Do you need medical? Do you need an ambulance here right now?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I don't understand this. I asked him why am I being pulled over. He said because I can't believe I'm arrested. Wait, no. Please communicate.
Idiot, I had to break the window. She was rolling it up on my hand. She's advising she's having a miscarriage. If you can call FD.
Communicate with me.
He gave you lawful order. You feel
I asked him what was the citation if the window has to be all the way down. He would not explain to me.
I told you.
I asked you what law.
I told you.
I asked you what law.
So, ma'am, you are being detained
Did I ask you what
for
law?
for a traffic infraction. I asked you to step out of the vehicle when you refused to roll down the window.
And I asked him why because he was getting loud when he was getting angry. I asked him why. Why?
That's from me.
Why? Why did I need
Why do you think?
Why did you get violent with me?
Ma'am, I didn't get violent at all.
Why did this happen?
Ma'am, this could have been completely avoided. This could have been avoided.
Out of my car.
You're right.
You grabbed me out of the car. You
You're
yanked
right.
me out of the car.
You're right, because you wouldn't comply.
No. I was
Yes,
in
ma'am.
the car safe. I
No,
showed
ma'am.
my hand. Why am I bleeding?
So, I mean, the BLM has definitely overreached. The spotlight was put on Nevada, and it was not, I have to tell you, the BLM, from all of the incidences that I've researched on them, they are nothing more. They've turned into a bureaucrat agency of terrorism. They terrorize Americans.
First or Second Amendment right do we to point a weapon at a duly authorized law enforcement
Okay,
officer
so
who's just out there doing
understand.
his job,
No,
right?
no, understand. We would never, ever, I would never, ever point my firearm at anyone, including an officer of the law, unless they pointed their firearm at me. Now, once you point your firearm at me, I'm sorry, then it becomes self-defense. So whether you're a stranger, a bad guy, or an officer, and you point your gun at me and you're going to shoot me, and I have to decide whether it's my life or your life, well, I choose.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. And we are back. Tonight we are here with Ken Schortgen of The Daily Economist. You can check him out at Thedailyeconomist.com. If you were listening to the clip that I had played regarding the woman where the window got smashed, and the officer said on the radio that she was rolling up the window on his arm, because of course you can't see the video. She was not rolling up the window on his arm. She would only roll down the window halfway or like a quarter, and that was his issue. And then, of course, he lied and said she was rolling down the window on his, rolling up the window on his arm. That was not actually true. So I wanted to point that out. So we are here on this Wednesday, as Ken joins us every other Wednesday, talking about geopolitics and the economy. We got a little into the history of Social Security from an article that we started talking about regarding the fact that people that are here, quote unquote, illegally are getting more in welfare than Americans that are here legally. I guess if you're an American, you'd be here
natively,
legally. Well, people have, somebody said that, actually, I think it was you on another show, you said natively, and then it sounded like you were saying like Native Americans, like Indians and
no, the
native confuse people.
You know,
and
if you were born in America, you
right.
are native to America.
Right,
See,
right.
Political correctness is gone.
Yeah,
you know, and if you think about it, the quote unquote Native Americans who were here, but when Columbus and Cortez got to the New World, they weren't originally from.
Well, Columbus didn't even hit the United States. He hit like the Caribbean.
Exactly. What I'm saying is that those who, you know, the Native American tribes, they weren't on the United States continent originally. They came over in the Bering Strait from, you know, Siberia and Kamchatka and all that. So this wasn't their original land. And unfortunately, throughout history, the one who has the most weapons and the strongest will, pretty much, forget America, every single country has been that way. So.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. What is your, and I don't want to get in a long conversation on this or anything, but your thoughts on, you know, the theory, I think it's is it the Pangea theory, where everything was connected at some point and it kind of broke apart and all of that shit? Do you know?
Yeah, I believe in Pangea. As a matter of fact, you know, we'll take a biblical story. It's not a religious story, but a biblical story. You know, the story of David and Goliath.
Yes, I actually do know. One of the few stories that I do know from the Bible.
Yeah, the Goliath, and you know, it wasn't just Goliath. Goliath had like 4 or 5 brothers, and they were all about 9-10 feet tall. they were giants. Well, they have found bones of giants in Cahokia, Illinois, in the West Coast, all over the United States, all over South America. And it was interesting because when the archaeologist who found these at the turn of the 20th century, all his work and all the bones were scooped up by the feds, taken to the Smithsonian Institute, and hidden away, because they desperately do not want people to realize that there are some aspects and stories going back in the Bible of giants, of other things that were around at the time. They want to push this Darwinism crap that we evolved from soup, not the fact that there was actually supernatural beings on the earth at one time. That's how these are the Tower of Babel that reached up into the heavens, how the Pyramid of Giza was laid out so perfectly.
I don't know about any of these things, but that's fine.
Yeah, the thing is there's a lot of history, because even pre-Bible, we're talking Babylonian texts, we're talking Sumerian texts. A lot of this stuff was, so Pangea, I believe that the earth was a thing, because there's something in Egypt, one of the pharaohs, I think it was Khufu, in some of the writings, the old hieroglyphics in the list of kings, he was quoted as saying, "Why is the earth continuously shuddering? Why is the rumbling?" And it went on for like 10 years, just eternal earthquakes. And it was like 3800 BC when the plates just started breaking. And that's when the Pangea continent
when it started to shift and become continents.
Yeah, it's in the Egyptian writings, not the biblical or Sumerian. That went on for 10 years, and that's probably when it broke away. So a lot of the natives who were there ended up just swimming across the Atlantic, what is now the Atlantic, and they were left on that island.
And I wonder if they even teach that now in school, because that's where I actually learned that.
Oh God, no, they don't teach that. Oh, no, I don't even know what they teach these days, but I would bet maybe 1% to 2% is actual. Well, they taught it
as
a fact,
as a theory, of course, but they did teach. That's where I learned it. So, but I also went to school in the Boston area, but that doesn't really mean anything now.
What I found interesting is there are some areas in the African desert that they found the footprints of dinosaurs at the same level, eon level as man. So there was, or whatever, humanoid. There are humanoid footprints in the exact soil at the exact place in the archaeological thing as dinosaurs.
Is that meaning that
they were at the same time?
Yeah, because the whole thing that what's told is that man and dinosaur were never around at the same time.
Exactly.
And that dinosaurs were long extinct.
If you take the facts about the archaeological finds, then all of a sudden Darwinism goes poof. How a dinosaur turned into a bird, how a monkey turned into a human, or how a snake turned into whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be the biblical God created it. You don't have to believe that, but I'm a big proponent of intelligent design. There's an intelligence in the universe. That's why everything is so orderly. So that's just my 2 cents.
Well, I mean, it does make the only animal that obviously you can see it with. Gorillas or monkeys or whatever, you could see the resemblance there. But besides that, I don't. It's hard to see man supposedly coming from fish or something.
See, the thing is there is evolution. I'm sorry, there is evolution. There's a reason why.
Well, if you
those from Africa,
they've proved that with cavemen and right?
Basic evolution. There's a reason why those in Africa are black. There's a reason why those are in Sweden, Norway, Oslo are extreme white. And
Well, it was adjusting
tan.
adjusting to the climate over
That's
years
evolution.
and years. Yeah.
Okay, there is evolution, but the evolution that Darwinism speaks is it must be like kind. Well, what they've never found is they've never found that middle length that goes from dinosaur to bird. There's no intermediate. There's no like kind, and so it's been disproven. But it's just like man-made global warming. Man-made global warming is an absolute farce. And when they come out and say the science is already settled. Just like when Obama came out a month ago
he
and
keeps
said
coming out and saying
anybody who says the economy is not good is delusional.
Right.
That's what they always try to say. The science is settled. Enough of the, you're a terrorist, you're a racist, you're a sexist if you disagree with us.
Yeah, well, that has been said on a number of things, that you are a terrorist if you disagree. That supposed expert on that Asian scientist, I have him saying it. I have the clip. I can't remember his name.
Michio Kaku?
Yeah, where he says if you don't believe in, I think it was global warming. It might have even been world government.
See, this is where they skew things
if
up.
You don't believe in world government.
Climate change is true. The climate has changed for a billion years. Okay, there's a reason why we had the medieval warming period, and another reason we had the Little Ice Age, and another reason why we had the Hudson River that was frozen over in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where you could walk across the Hudson River from New York City to New Jersey, but you can't do it today. There was a reason we had a Dust Bowl. There was climate change is there, but it's based on the sun. If you think about it, what is climate? Climate has to do with a temperature inversion on the atmosphere of the thing. So if the sun is putting out more sunspots and putting out more solar radiation onto the atmosphere, you're going to get a hotter time. If there are fewer sunspots and it's a Maunder minimum type thing cycle, you're going to get colder type. That's the way it's been from the very beginning. They're trying to push man-made global warming. Well,
right. Well, because my thing is anybody who comes up with some theory and they have an agenda behind it to collect taxes, to create world government, and all of these things based on some theory, that's not very believable to me, just based on the fact that they have an agenda behind it. So,
by the way, these same scientists, not all 100%, but these same scientists, these government-funded, these United Nations ones, these intellectual eggheads from Harvard and Ivy League schools and Oxford. In the 1970s, there's a Time magazine thing. We are now entering into an ice age. Really?
Yeah,
we went 40 years ago from an ice age to global warming.
Yeah, I heard that they were, in the 70s, it was, pretty soon an ice age is coming up. Then it was, global warming. Then it's climate change. Then it's, it's whatever fits.
What it is it's Agenda 21, where they want absolute control over the planet.
Right. It's a way to, like I was saying, it's a way to push an agenda. And
exactly.
You can use that to, push your agenda. If you're taxing somebody on electricity where they can't afford anything other than a little 200 square foot apartment, which is what they ultimately want, then obviously I have my doubts as to the motivation when they say, "Oh, it's because of this." Well,
you know where the Agenda 21 comes from in carbon credits and all that. It's an evolution from something that rose in the 1930s. You've heard of the technocrats, right? And technocracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the technocrats actually were originally a club in, I think it was one of the Ivy League schools. I'm going to say Yale. It's probably a different one, but I'm going to just say Yale for that thing. If I'm wrong, somebody remind me. But there's some pictures and some early video or early film that at the height, there was like 500,000 people who were part of this cult, the cult of technocracy. And the whole purpose behind technocracy was to get rid of money, and that all value would be based on energy. Okay? That's how they would do it. And, as we got into World War II and that the cult, sort of died out, well, there was this gentleman who became a professor at Yale University, and he went into the archives and he rediscovered this. And he wrote some books on it. Well, this individual, of course, decided to make it make it a lifelong vision, and he actually got in with some of the corrupt individuals in Congress. He got some backing from the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation, and he eventually put in a president, got an individual elected as president, and was on his national security advisor. The president, of course, was Jimmy Carter, and the individual who was a Yale professor who re-engineered technocracy was Zbigniew Brzezinski. That name should be familiar.
Yeah.
And Brzezinski used his technocracy. He reconstituted technocracy from the 1930s and created the Trilateral Commission. And the whole purpose behind the Trilateral Commission was to put individuals in government.
I thought that was Rockefeller that created Trilateral Commission.
Well, I mean, a number of people did.
Along
but
with,
it came up from Brzezinski's book in the 70s on technocracy. And Rockefellers and the Rothschilds bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Because you know why? Because they controlled the world's energy. Standard Oil, ExxonMobil, Dutch Petroleum, Shell, all those were owned by the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. And if they could control energy, and energy was money, then they control, the means of the world. So anyway, this is why in the 1970s, as Nixon went out, it was originally Kissinger, but Brzezinski had a big, Kissinger was a follower of Brzezinski. And this is why they created the petrodollar system. Money backed by oil instead of gold. And it was all tied to this technocracy cult that wanted energy to be the units of value, not gold or any other currency.
Right.
Well, of course, we've been on a petrodollar system now since 1973. But the petrodollar system is falling away. So they knew that its time was falling away, so they had to replace it. And what's the newest scheme that is energy-based form of currency? Carbon credits. This is why they've gone from the petrodollar to carbon credits, because they want to keep that technocracy of energy as money.
Well, that's even better because, everybody breathes out carbon dioxide. So
yeah, we can stop all carbon dioxide, and every plant on the planet would die.
Right.
And we'd all starve and die.
You can start measuring what you breathe out and tax you on your emissions of carbon dioxide that you can have something hooked up to you.
Think about how insane this is. The EPA passed through, and nobody ever questioned it, that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and is a pollutant. Carbon dioxide, that means from the very beginning, that means that we should tax volcanoes. Because volcanoes have caused more pollutants into the atmosphere over time than any man-made era of creation in history. As a matter of fact, it was not Krakatoa, but it was another one in the 15 or 1600s that blew and created what was called the around the world the year without a summer. The dust and the ash in the air was so great it lasted for like 18 months, and the world never saw the sun. Now, were we burning coal? Were we burning oil? Were we doing this? No, it was one single volcano that created this. And it put more pollutants in the air than all of mankind in our history, that one single volcano. And we're worried about man-made global warming?
Well,
right.
And cow emissions. I'll call it cow emissions. But
cow farts.
Basically, that they want to literally look for ways to decrease that, and
it's all about control.
Totally. Because at some point, and it's not a joke, and it's not far fetched. The people will have some kind of device that calculates what their carbon dioxide emissions, I guess, are. Just like cars, and they will pay some kind of tax on it, and it's really a way to also, population control and get rid of people, and it about being more about the earth than the people that are living on the earth. Because to me, what's the purpose of the earth if people can't live on it? It's like, it's pointless.
You remember that old T-shirt that says "Earth first, and then we'll bag all the other planets later"? That's the epitome of the elite. It's they're more than happy to just rape and destroy the planet, and they'll blame the people for the reason that it's deteriorating, and then they'll go off and to their underground bunkers or to other planets or whoever that when they're ready. No, the whole purpose behind this, just about everything is, as you said, an agenda. Looking at this study, the Center of Immigration Studies did an analysis of federal cost figures, found that all immigrant-headed households, both legal and illegal, receive an average of $6,241 in welfare, which is 41% more than native households.
So sorry, say that again, the percentages?
Okay. The legal and illegal immigrants.
Okay.
Which include...
First of all, how do you even get welfare if you're not here legally without getting thrown out of the country?
We have a federal government who just wants to create money and throw it to everybody, because what does it do? It buys votes.
Well, I realize in I think it was last January they started it, that in Nevada, if you're not here legally, you can still go get a license.
Now, here's the interesting. The total cost of money given to households headed by immigrants, and these immigrants are a number of different things. They're green cards, which means they're supposed to be here temporary, H-1B visas, which are here for work study, students from other countries, and of course the illegals that are in here. So all of them are not permanent residents. When you have immigrants, you're talking non-permanent residents.
So you're talking about, this includes both?
Both. Yeah, well,
this includes
legal and illegal immigrants. And when I say immigrant, I'm talking non-permanent. It means that they have a green card, a visa, or something that means that they're not a
right. So you're not talking about somebody who immigrated here and became a citizen or a permanent resident.
Correct.
You're talking about somebody who either immigrated here illegally or immigrated here as a non-permanent resident, or is here on...
Right, because we've got hundreds of thousands of people who are here from other countries that are on H-1B visas that are here supposedly to fill jobs. Right. And yet they're still getting...
That they're
welfare.
Only supposed to be here for the length of the job, like if it's a project, or like a lot of Indians come over and do that and work on projects.
Correct.
Okay, so
but the total cost is $103 billion, and that's not just federal. Okay, that's also the state. California alone spends $26 billion. This also includes schooling, illegals, food stamps, Section 8 housing, direct cash payments, a number of other different things.
One of the
$103 billion. Now, what could we do with $103 billion to our infrastructure and create jobs?
Well, one of the things people don't realize, just real quick to mention, is that just because if it's in a state doesn't mean it doesn't affect your state, because the federal government obviously collects money from all the states and then divvies money out. So your state still pays into that. So even though if something goes on in one state, it doesn't necessarily mean that your state didn't pay for it, that you didn't have anything to
Well,
do
true,
with
but
it.
if you have, if you pay unemployment insurance, say for your job, if you get injured in the job, you get unemployment insurance or whatever it is, that's state. That doesn't go to the federal. That's state.
Right. No, I realize there's things that are state, but what I'm saying is that the federal government also collects, a certain amount of money from each state. And there was a study on this that there are a lot of states that pay in a lot less than what they get back, or vice versa. So what I'm saying is when it comes to any federal money or anything like that, it doesn't mean that you're not paying for issues that are going on in other states, because you are.
Yeah, here's the thing. Down in the South, a lot of blacks get welfare, a lot of whites get welfare. In a place like the Midwest, a modicum amount of whites get welfare, a lot of blacks get welfare. The Northeast, a lot more blacks get welfare than whites get welfare. So it's the percentages, it depends. But if you encompass the South, a lot of
just everybody,
white family, everybody
it's a
gets
lot of
welfare.
everybody. Well, because they were saying that, I think Alabama was one of the states that what they pay in, they get so much more back from the federal government compared to what they pay to the federal government.
Right. Plus, and if you take a look, some of the worst ranked schools are in the South: Mississippi, Alabama. The two states that have the best schooling, test wise, and that, Texas and Florida, because they put a lot of money into it, and they don't take a lot of welfare.
Mass was up there.
I'm sure it's top 10, but
the
two for the past 3 or 4 years have been Texas and Florida. Arizona's pretty much down on the scale, and
Nevada's like number 49 as far as their rankings of the schools. Not anything to do with money, but it just as far as the ranking. I think it's like number 49. It's pretty bad.
Isn't it funny? Even in the 1930s, we had single room schools in a lot of little towns around the country, and yet we went to the moon. We sent a man to the moon. We had the world's greatest economy with education that didn't cost jack squat. And now we put more money per student into education, and we're ranked between 30 and 35th in the world.
Well, because that's how they solve see, I don't believe in government schools, period, because it's government babysitting. And really, what you're doing is you're dropping your kid off to spend time with some stranger all day when you really should be spending time with your kids. But that's a whole other
but we used
issue.
to be able to do that, until the 1960s when they jacked up inflation so that both parents had to work.
But there's still, I've talked about this, where even with both parents have to work, and I understand that there's ways where you can get with people in your community and like-minded people and figure things out where, you babysit on the weekends for them and they do, whatever. There's ways that people can get together with like-minded people and say fuck government schools.
Well, true, but it is changing. Within 10 years, I would personally believe that you're going to see about 20 to 25% of all students no longer being in the classroom, no longer being in the school thing, and everything's going to be run online.
Well,
that's just within 10 years.
That would save a lot of money because you wouldn't have the, all the overhead of classrooms and electric bill and all of those things. And that's, a possibility. They already have that for, like, Nevada has an online school for high school.
That's what I'm saying.
You can get your high school diploma online, and it's like you're not actually following the same Common Core bullshit neither, but you can get your diploma online for high school.
Exactly. And like I said, my guess is by 10 years, you're going to see 25% of all K through 12 going to be online. And if you do it online, you can do it at home. The problem is that, of course, you're going to need somebody who's going to be responsible to watch if both parents are working.
Well, that's where it's going to come. The problem's going to be is right now, parents are getting, a form of welfare. They're getting free babysitting.
True. But what's going to happen is you're going to get these charter schools, and there's soon going to be charter schools that are online. And the instructors are really going to be, glorified babysitters. It's going to be much cheaper. They're just going to monitor output.
Yeah, but if they're online, I mean, you still can't have that kid, just because they're online, home alone when they're, 5 or 6 or 7.
Did you ever see that news story about that one family? I mean, none of these kids were geniuses, none of them. But it was a couple who had 5 kids, and they were between the ages of. They started them out about age 4 and say 15 or 16. And what they did was they didn't have a set core curriculum. What they did is they let them play, they let them read, they let them do. And then all
it's
of
called
a sudden,
radical unschooling. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not sure what it's called, but they ended up. Each of the kids started moving towards something they loved to do. Like one kid had was fantasy about King Arthur days. So from there, he learned how to sword fight. He learned how to this, and then his parents started encouraging. Well, why don't you study the history of it and whatever? And he found something he loved. Well, the first 3 of these kids, they passed the homeschooling high school curriculum diploma, whatever, by age 12. All 3 of the top, the older kids. They all finished college before they were 15 years old. Now, like I said, these are not geniuses who, the Doogie Howsers type things. These are just regular, 100 to 110 IQ kids. But because of the way they were taught, the way they opened their minds and they found something they desired, it burst learning, their learning curve beyond. And so they were out of college by like age 15, 16,
that's
starting going into the real world.
It sounds like what you're talking about is essentially is radical unschooling. And I have had somebody on the show who has like 5 kids who does that. And essentially what they did was whatever they wanted to do, whatever their interest was, is what they would do. And I guess the oldest son's already like a blacksmith, and he was doing something else as well. And I had her on the show, and she was on Dr. Phil and Wife Swap and a couple other things, a couple other shows also. And if you look at the statistics for homeschoolers in general, that they have much better SAT scores and go to better schools and do better in college than kids that go to government schools.
Well, sure. And the part of the problem with the government schools, of course, is that they are now created for the lowest common denominator. if you get they can only go as fast as the least student in the class. And with what's an estimated 25% of all kids are on Ritalin, 40% of all Americans are on some type of psychotropic drug, it's impossible if you want to learn and get out. I remember when I was in high school, not because I had to or whatever, I loved history. So when I was taking my American history course, and when I was a junior in high school, I got the book, and in the first 5 days I read the whole thing because I wanted to, because I loved the subject, I loved the thing. But I got into class, and more than half the people never read it during the course of the semester. They didn't care. They just wandered off. But I was stuck with my learning curve was stuck for all these half of the class that didn't do the work and didn't really care.
Right. Well, that's another issue with schools as well, is they group everybody by age and just throw them into the classroom, and it's not by your level, really. I mean, yes, they have different levels, but I mean they only do so much. It's very limited in what they can do. And that's another issue as well. Why would you have a kid that is so far advanced be in the same grade as somebody who's not, just because they're the same age? And there's so many issues with government schools and the structure of the school system. And of course, they got it from the Prussian model anyway, which was about control. And now they're really indoctrinating kids.
A conformist worker. That's all it is.
Yeah,
back in the Prussian days, it was create soldiers,
right? But it was also in agree with the king. I mean, they wanted people to agree with the king, and that, from what I had heard, that they lost a battle to Napoleon because they thought, and he did not want the soldiers to think. He just wanted them to do what they wanted them to do, and they also didn't want the king's ideas to be questioned.
Right.
So now,
what's real quick. What's interesting on that is there's a story that the Prussians, because obviously you're talking about Napoleon, so you're talking about 1805 to 1812. The Civil War is considered the world's first modern war, because it involved battles that were not involved in taking the capital, mobile armies and high level artillery. So one of the Prussians actually sent a number of their advisors to the United States to observe the battles, all across the country during the Civil War. They went back and they took what they learned, and that's how they solidified Germany into a nation in 1870. They just used the fact that they clipped off certain portions of France, Alsace-Lorraine, and et cetera, and then they took 39 separate counties that had made up the Germanic people, and then they moved them into Germany, whether it was East Prussia, West Prussia, Saxony, et cetera, et cetera. But what the Prussian generals said, or the advisors said, is that the difference between their army and the American soldier is that the American soldier will always question authority, and once he understands what he needs to do, then he will do it, and he will do it with fervor. The Prussian soldiers are trained, just like you said, not to question, just to walk to the front and die, and not even question what they're going. Well, the problem is that that has to assume that those who are in leadership and command know what they're doing.
Right. Because if they don't, then they're fucking screwed.
And needless to say, Prussia is long gone. Germany has lost its place militarily in the world.
Well, because they didn't have any of those people, because they weren't creating any, really. Because most of the people, if everybody's in, that's the same class or in that type of school, how many people are going to rise up as intelligent leaders? I mean, there will be some, but not the amount you would get if you're teaching people to think on their own.
something else about the Civil War. It wasn't just the Southern Army and the Northern Army. A lot of the Union Army was actually made up of a bunch of militias. And some of them were like the Irish militia, Irish immigrants who came and they created their own militia, and they had their own squadrons and divisions and designations. So they fought differently than, say, the German divisions, militias, et cetera, et cetera. So we were still fighting with a bunch of militias in the Civil War. There was a quote unquote Union Army, but there was still a lot of designated militias that were separate, did their own tactical fighting, in and amongst there.
So we only got about 15 minutes left. So I just want to finish up on this story and then get to any other important stories. Like I said, I know that central banks are getting rid of U.S. dollars, and there's some stories on gold. But so generally, I mean, what I know that it's reporting that illegals are getting more in welfare, obviously, but where do things go from here, I guess? I mean, is it, if you have to, somebody passes a law where you have to be here a certain amount of time, or?
Oh, I don't think they're going to do that, but it's going to be a big question. We're not going to get any answers until the election. It depends. If Hillary's in there, my guess is welfare is going to expand. If Bernie gets in, welfare is going to expand double than what
that's
it is.
A whole
He's willing to give
thing,
anything to anybody at all times.
He's not going to get the nomination. It's not with super delegates.
I'm not knocking it out, because you know what? More and more is coming out that an indictment against Hillary is very, very close. As a matter of fact, the FBI has given a pseudo form of immunity to the Hungarian hacker Guccifer, because Guccifer claims that he hacked in and stole all the data from her server. We already know the Russians have all of and the 20,000 emails that supposedly got lost from Hillary's server that has all the juicy stuff. The Russians have it, and they're already in discussions on whether to disseminate it publicly. So, the State Department came out today and said that from an investigation with all the previous secretaries of state, yes, Hillary Clinton did incorrectly, they didn't use the word unlawfully yet, but she incorrectly handled classified material with her email. So insinuations and indictments are coming upon her. So I'm not knocking out Bernie Sanders. Let me tell you something. When Hillary started against Trump, she had a 13-point lead. Now there are 3 polls where she is behind Trump. If Trump starts getting a big lead going into the convention season in July, do not be surprised if the Democrats allow Hillary to fall on her sword just so they can have a candidate that has any potential of winning. Because if Hillary's got all this baggage and she's getting trounced by Trump, Democrats will lose everything. They'll lose the House. They already lost the House and Senate, but they won't get it back. They'll have the presidency, and whoever owns presidency is going to put in at least 3 new Supreme Court judges. So this is a high-stakes game. And Hillary is not as all-powerful as the Clintons used to be.
Well, again, I mean, I think however it goes, it's all rigged. But
well, yeah, and
we'll
like
see.
you said, the importance of watching the elections, because it's going to have an incredible effect on monetary policy, on the economy, and especially when it comes to the global move towards free trade agreements. I wrote an article yesterday or the day before over at roguemoney.net, one of the sites I do, and it talks about what the U.S. corporations are doing when it comes to during a economic slowdown, and what Russia is doing, and it's using M&A, mergers and acquisitions. We have, in 1997, during the height of the dot-com bubble, there were 8,800 companies that were listed on the American exchanges, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the Amex.
Mm-hmm.
There were 8,800. Now there's just barely over 5,000. Now, a lot of those, went bankrupt after the dot-com bubble, but the vast majority of them were, picked up as acquisitions. You remember Time Warner bought AOL, they bought MySpace,
Right.
They ended up having to dump those and sell those. But there, we've had a number of those happen in the last 3 years. And when businesses are not growing and they desperately need to show shareholder value, they do acquisitions. And what three big ones are going up? We have Dow wanting to merge with DuPont, two of the biggest chemical companies in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's conglomerate. They're looking to buy Yahoo. And then the big one, this is a fascinating thing, and this is a story that came out today, and it'll blow your mind. We have Bayer, Bayer aspirin, Bayer pesticides.
I heard about this, that they want to buy Monsanto. But I thought a German company was going to buy them.
Well, Bayer is a German company.
But I don't know that was the German company that they were talking about.
Yeah, they're buying Monsanto. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating, and I don't know if I told Angel this on her show, Angel Clark, earlier today. Here is how convoluted the central banks and their quantitative easing crap is. The European Central Bank, when they first started doing quantitative easing, they said, we're going to buy sovereign bonds, like Greek debt, Spanish debt, German debt. We're going to do that to try to help the banks get these toxic, worthless assets off. We're going to just print money and buy them. Okay, they did that. Well, they needed to get more liquidity to the banks because there wasn't as much sovereign debt as they needed. So they said, we're going to buy municipal debt. We're going to buy the debt from cities and, in Bonn, Germany, and in Berlin, in Madrid, etc. We're going to buy municipal debt. Well, that still wasn't enough to get massive liquidity because if you remember, the Federal Reserve did $19 trillion at the start of their bank bailouts and quantitative easing, $19 trillion just to get things going in the U.S. So there wasn't enough municipal debt. So now they decided to do corporate debt. We're going to buy corporate debt. Well, companies can sell bonds. Apple does this especially. Apple's got most of their money offshore, so they don't have to pay tax on it. But if they need access to cash to, say, make a acquisition or to expand a factory or do like that, what they'll do is they'll issue a bond at, say, 3 or 4% interest. And of course, since they're, well-funded company and AAA rated, everybody gobbles it up. Since the ECB is now buying corporate debt, all Bayer has to do is they offered $62 billion to Monsanto to buy the company. Monsanto turned down the offer, but said, well, we're still open to negotiation. So if you up the price a little bit more, we may be interested. Bayer can go out and sell some corporate bonds, get maybe about 15-20 billion in new cash in debt. And guess who's going to buy that debt? The European Central Bank. So they can just create a bond. Bayer can just create a bond out of thin air. People will buy it, and then the central bank will buy the bond from the people.
What does Bayer want with Monsanto? Is that
Bayer's
the only? You're talking about the Bayer aspirin too, right?
Yeah, well, Bayer
they also
is
do
like Johnson
pesticides.
Johnson. It's got all
that they have a whole
stuff.
bunch of different stuff. Okay.
But for the people who don't remember Bayer Corporation, they're the ones who in the 1930s created. I'm mispronouncing it, but it was
they
like
had
cyclacine.
Didn't they have heroin? The cough medicine.
They created the pills that they were used in the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Bayer created the gas chamber
that's nice
stuff. Yeah. And of course, who funded them was Henry Ford, Prescott Bush.
Yeah, all of them fuckers.
Yeah. So this is the same as Monsanto. They're globalist, ruthless, vile elitists who own. This is their babies. So anyway, you got these two companies, but here's the thing: if they do a corporate bond and they sell it, and they owe $20 billion in the corporate bond, the ECB is going to go ahead and buy it for free. So the ECB is going to pay for this merger and acquisition. The central banks are going to pay for these corporations to merge.
That's nice.
I know. This is how insane it's gotten. This is why Russia and China and the BRICS are trying to get completely away from this, because it is insanity. It's not even sound money. We'll just call it insane money. And then, of course, Switzerland in the first or second week of June. So we're just a couple weeks away. Switzerland's going to have a referendum.
But aren't they giving out money or something?
Exactly. They're going to offer their citizens what's called a universal income thing. They're not going to worry about welfare anymore. You don't have to fill out a form. You don't have to prove your income. You don't have to do this. They're just going to give it to everybody. 2,500 euros or 2,500 Swiss francs per person, per adult.
How much is that, U.S.?
And $625 per kid. So if you have a household with two parents and two kids, that's the equivalent of $75,000 US a year. How many
a year? So
a year.
I mean, how long are they going to do this?
Permanent for a while, but obviously if you're printing money.
So what does anybody have to work for?
That's the point. Here's the problem. In the West, we don't produce anything. Our economy, as we've talked about before, is 80 to 90% consumer spending,
right.
Either consumer spending or military spending. Federal government spending. 80 to 90% is consumer spending. Well, if people don't have jobs, and the jobs they do have are part-time and low wage, what are we spending our money on? Well, fuel costs are rising, rents are rising out the roof, food is rising, so we're spending everything on necessities. Nobody has any discretionary spending. So this is what the term helicopter money, when Bernanke said this about 5 or 6 years ago, and Mario Draghi for the ECB said he's going to follow it. He says, hey, if we need to, we will drop money on the people from a helicopter. You may be seeing those TV shows where like a bad guy's trying to get away with a robbery in a helicopter, and somebody shoots his briefcase or the money bags, and all the money starts flying down.
Out.
That's exactly what it is.
So is this? And you said 75,000.
The equivalent in Swiss francs of $75,000 US per year per family, per household.
Do they have that kind of money to give away and not be in debt?
They can print them.
Well, true.
They can print it.
So is that what they plan on doing? Is just the central bank is going to print all this money?
Yes, because they need consumers, and they think that if people have this money and they know that they're getting it, every single thing. Oh, by the way, this doesn't. If you have a job and you're making additional income, that you get to keep that, minus whatever taxes.
But isn't the money isn't going to be worth anything at some point?
Now you've hit the nail on the head.
Because if you're printing that much money...
How long until hyperinflation?
Right.
See, I think they want to try to do this because they expect it to be short term, give all these people money so that they can spend. It'll boost the economy. It'll generate jobs. And then once they get the economy going again, then they can go ahead and pull back from this thing. But the problem is it never works that way. Once you start a program, people are inherently lazy.
They're going to be relying on that money. They're going to be quitting, especially
younger
people.
My job is to spend and go shopping.
Right.
That's what the government wants me to do.
Especially younger people that, don't think about things like that.
Well, there's another reason why I'm going to do this. Foxconn, which is the Chinese corporation that makes almost all our Apple products, they're replacing 60,000 laborers with robots. 60,000. Within 10 years, you're going to have probably 12% of all jobs worldwide replaced by robots.
Well, Wendy's has
What are they
already
gonna
talked
do
about
anyway?
going and automating their, order takers.
Oh, they're already replacing it. There is a McDonald's. Oh no, it's a KFC. There's a Kentucky Fried Chicken test experiment store in China that has
That
all
they started
robots
doing it
and
already?
one individual, an engineer, not a manager, an engineer.
Right. Yeah, I know that Wendy's so far came out and said that they're going to do it. I don't know at what point, and I don't have any of the details, but they've announced that they're going to do it. So it's only a matter of time until all of these other corporations do it with the same type thing, where they have an engineer or two there just in case something breaks down. Just like you have all of the supermarkets and even Walmart started doing this, that they have automatic checkout. They have one person there in case the machine, fucks up, and you just go. And anytime I can go through automatic checkout, I always do it.
By the way, there's two quick things. I know we're running out of time here, but there's two quick things I want to touch on. For people who, we talked about Social Security. There's nothing in Social Security. It's gonna collapse on its own within 5 to 10 years anyway. But for people who believe in pensions and trust their businesses, their companies, their unions, this came out. The Central States Pension Fund, which is the America's largest union-based pension fund. I mean, it's the Teamsters, the AFL-CIO. These are all part of the Central States Pension Fund. Has no new plan to avoid insolvency. Without government funding, the fund will run out of money in 10 years. At that time, pension benefits for about 407,000 people will be reduced to virtually nothing. In a last-ditch effort, they asked the government to approve a partial reduction of pension benefits to 115,000 current retirees and a future benefits 150,000 current employees. And you know how much they want to cut their current benefits by? 60%.
That's a lot.
But when they did the numbers, 60% wasn't enough.
So they still wouldn't have enough money even after cutting it 60%.
Yeah, they need people, retirees, who put their money in to trust in the mafia union funds. They're going to get down to maybe 20% of what they're saying. So Social Security is going by the wayside. Pension plans, this is a private pension plan by a union. You talk about Illinois, they're like $70 billion short. California is tens of billions of dollars short. Kentucky is insolvent, completely insolvent. They're 74% underfunded, or 26% underfunded. Okay, you have to rely on your own self in some capacity for your retirement.
I thought that was, to me, that's just a given.
Well, people still think that because when they sign on for a job and they get promises, but if you're putting more money into 401ks, IRAs, you know what? That's going to be bailed in the next financial collapse. So that's going to be taken. The government, if they're desperate, they're going to go ahead and nationalize all retirement plans. They have the click of a mouse. Everything is digital. They can steal it in less than a day. So for those who are still, looking at some ways to protect yourself, the two biggest moving areas are gold and silver, physical gold and silver, and then the gold mining stocks, which were beat down since 2013 by a boatload. I mean, they were cut in half, and then they were cut in half again, and then they were cut in half a third time in price. And in just one move, in like a 2-month move, there was some people have had like a 250% return on investment. So if you're looking at any stocks, and this is not a suggestion or advice to buy, the junior miners are going to be one of the greatest wealth redistributions in finance you'll ever see. And one thing to remember about Great Depressions, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, not everybody was dirt poor. Only a third of the people were out of jobs. A third of the people stayed the same, but another third got rich. You could, the most money will be made during times of severe crisis.
Right.
If you know what you're doing, if you know where to move. So the world is moving and rushing headlong to a return to the gold standard. That's where you're going to make your returns, and it's going to make up for a lot of these paper fiat security, paper securities like stocks, like bonds, like pension funds that are just, electronic blips that can be gone in a second. That's going to be replaced when the real hard assets like farmland, like real estate, like, businesses that productive businesses, when they get revalued in the new financial system that comes out of this, that's where, the new wealth's going to come from.
Right. All right. Well, that's all the time we have tonight. Ken, thanks as always. And Ken will be back in 2 weeks. Check him out at Thedailyeconomist.com. And you can read about the stuff we didn't get to. And we will be back tomorrow.
We don't get to pick the law. We enforce them. But at the end of the
Hopefully,
day,
I think Katie Reyes will be joining us, but I'm not sure. But I will be here, so be sure to tune in tomorrow, same time, same channel. All right, have a good night, everybody.
Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Story before we get into geopolitics and the economy. There was a story I came across regarding, again, because there's a lot of stories in the past few years like this, people that they're calling essentially terrorists. People have made fun of them and called them Al-Qaeda and vanilla ISIS, like they're a, mostly white rednecks or something like that, or rural groups, which I don't think is the case, because I agree with them to a certain extent, although they're mainly constitutionalists. So let me bring Ken on, and if he wants to chime in, he can chime in on this as well. And then I'm sure there's a lot of things going on, a lot still going on with gold, I know, which probably will be going on for a long time to come, and other stories as well. So, Ken, thanks as always for joining us.
Evening, Dave. Pleasure to be here.
So I know we usually just, if I talk about a story, I'll talk about it in the beginning before I bring you on. But I figured I'd bring you on and get your opinion on this as well, and which I'm sure you have one. Essentially, and I don't know if you came across this story, probably not. It was in Drudge a couple days ago, but there's been similar stories in the past where the federal government is criticizing any groups that are considered militias or extremist or anti-government groups, like what happened at the Bundy Ranch and what happened in Oregon. And of course, they bring in their partners, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has done actual training, scary fucking training, because I've played the training videos where, if you're a cop and you're a rookie cop and you come in and you watch one of these videos, I mean, they make it seem like the majority of Americans, you got to be scared that if you pull them over, they're going to fucking kill you. And the amount of cops that get killed are so small. I mean, that actually get killed by other people. There's car accidents. Even that's small. Even as a total, it's small. But if you actually take the amount of cops that get killed by other people, You have more that get killed in car accidents than even I'm talking on the job, than that get killed by other people, and then you have, of course, cops that get killed by they're running after a suspect or something like that has nothing to do with any of these groups. I mean, the amount of cops that get killed by so-called extremist militia groups is, maybe the average, and this is average, and maybe one a year or something like that if you were to take the totals from, the past 10 years. It's not a lot, but they propagandize it like it's a normal thing, which is scary because it puts these ideas in the cops' heads and they're trigger happy enough already. Then you got them, coming out and seeing videos like that. It's scary, but they're calling them terrorists, and they're saying that they're more of a danger than groups like ISIS and Muslim terrorists and all of that. And a lot of it, of course, they point to Obama. They go through what happened at Ruby Ridge and what happened at Oklahoma City in retaliation, supposedly, which I think, and this is based on information of somebody I know that was part of the militia movement, that was totally a false flag event. But that's a whole nother story. But what happened in Waco, and which I don't know if if people even remember some of those things that happened in the 90s with what happened at Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. But mainly, it's just another article warning people, hey, you have all of these people that are out there that are extremist, and the government needs to keep an eye on them, and they're anti-government, and they could attack the government. They're preppers, they're this and that. So it's a long article, so I don't want to get into the whole thing, but I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about, and that there's been in the past few years a lot of articles like this. And of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center links it to racism and goes back to 2008 and says, well, since 2008, there used to be, say, 100 groups, now there's 1,000 groups, and all of that stuff. And I think, if anything, that may be the case as a reaction to Obama, but not because he was black, because of his policies, that he came out as what they viewed as a socialist. And a lot of people got nervous about that. And especially in the past 4 years, he's been coming after guns, or at least since his reelection.
Yeah, the thing about it is really it's simplistic. When you take all of these things into it, they use terms to program the people. When they mean government, they mean their oligarchy establishment. The system that they put into place that supersedes what the government was ever supposed to be under the Constitution. Right. And it's more of a corporatocracy. Okay. Everything that's done today is to protect the corporatocracy. Now, here's the interesting thing. Recently there was a Syrian, quote, rebel who has ties to Al-Qaeda, who was in Washington talking with one of the, I don't know if it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but it's one of those generals who is a planner. And he's retiring, but he was there discussing how upset they are because the poor Syrian rebels have been destroyed. The Russians took care of that along with ISIS, and they're trying to see about getting another $500 million or whatever to train some more to try to get Assad out. So here's the thing: ISIS was a CIA, Mossad, MI6 creation.
Right.
The Syrian rebels were those same ones in Libya during Benghazi who took out Gaddafi, and then they stopped in Benghazi, got the arms, moved up to Syria. They're just a bunch of Arabs not affiliated with any states that call themselves rebels for whatever price. They're mercenaries.
Well,
the thing is, the establishment controls both of those. The establishment does not control militia groups within the United States.
But
that's why they're the enemies, and Al Qaeda and Syrian rebels and ISIS are not the enemies.
Just real quick, they've even admitted. I saw a documentary, or it was a report of ISIS fighters in Afghanistan. And they were talking to some of them, and they were saying, why are you fighting for ISIS? And one of the guys said straight up, and I don't know how many this is the case with. It might be the case with the majority. He said, because I can't make this much money working whatever he was working. That was why. He didn't give a fuck about the whole, Muslim thing or caliphate or any of that shit. He's like, they pay me more.
Well, yeah. And the thing about it is, in the Middle East is similar to, like the United States. There's a 1% that has all the money, and there's 45 to 50% that are dirt poor. In the Middle East, it's the same way. You have the House of Saud, you have the imams, you have the clerics, the religious classes. They have all the money. The rest, 90 to 95%, are dirt poor. So if you don't have a job and you're under this, don't have any prospects of a future, and they tell you, hey, come fight with us, and we'll pay you $500 a day, and we're getting funded by the West. We're getting funded by Turkey when we sell our oil that we steal over there, and they all got white Nike shoes and Toyota trucks. You wonder where those come from?
Yeah, because the U.S. is paying the money. And so, I mean, how many do you think, based on what you know, or how many, just your opinion, how many of these fighters, because I would say probably more than less, the majority, now maybe not a huge majority, but I would say a majority, are fighting, for the paycheck? And how many actually believe in this shit? Because the leaders I know are the ones associated with the CIA. Then you have, the foot soldiers. And how many of them are really fighting for some kind of ideology? And how many are really just fighting for the fucking paycheck?
Oh, I would say a large majority are for the ideology. Because you got to remember, a lot of them that came from Europe when they all joined ISIS, that came, France has a huge Muslim population in Paris. Britain has a huge population.
Yeah, they do now.
Denmark.
Since like the past.
No, they've had them since the 70s.
In
the 1970s, there was a thing that was passed in the early days of the European Union, the Arab immigration thing. And so France, which had always been at war with Algeria, they opened up so that they could move across with visas. And there was a huge migration in the 70s of Arabs into Europe.
But I even thought in the past 10 years, too, that it's also again went up recently, and I could be wrong about that, but I thought
it's been with the refugee crisis, but
not with the recent refugee crisis, but I'm saying even before that, like in the past, since like 2000 or
it's more birth rate issue. The birth rates for the white Europeans has either been flat or negative, has been declining. But each of these, Muslim families has, 2 to 5 to 6 kids. And so over the course of 20 years, you're going to, double and double and double again. So.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws. We enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is May 25th, 2016. I was like, I had to stop for a minute there. There's too many fives today, being it the 25th of May. And we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, and SoundCloud, and the next day on Stitcher. And I apologize, as yesterday we actually, because I was doing some testing for the new show that we have coming in the next couple weeks or so, as I announced yesterday, Ellen Ball will be doing her own show. She'll be coming back to the network, but this time she will be hosting her own show as opposed to co-hosting on Nonpartisan Liberty for All. But I was doing some testing and I didn't put the settings back, and the show yesterday didn't go out live. It went out as private, so nobody could hear it when I was broadcasting live, and I didn't realize that till after the show was over. But it is out there for everyone to listen to. You can go to any of the applications, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Tumblr, YouTube, and listen to the show. We talked a lot about opium on yesterday's show and the propaganda that mainly you get from all government media, but specifically I was talking about this show called Drugs Inc., which is from either the History Channel or National Geographic or one of those. I think they're all part of the same family of channels. So we talked a lot about that and how essentially they want to blame everything on the doctors. It's all the doctors' fault, and really it's the government, in my opinion. Part of the responsibility obviously is the person, but it's also, if you want to blame anybody, it's the government that are the ones by keeping drugs illegal. Tonight, Ken Schortgen is going to be with us, but before I bring Ken on, and actually maybe I can just bring him on and get his opinion on this.
And the problem is that because they come from places that have extreme Wahhabism religion, the sect, as opposed to like Persia, which has a more moderate sect of Islam, the Shiite or the Ba'ath Party, like Iraq was. Most of these are from the Wahhabist nations like Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Chechnya, et cetera, and so they follow their clerics to the core. And as the clerics say jihad, then they mindlessly from birth hate the Jew, hate the Christian, hate the European, hate the white man. It's jihad all the time. We're going to take over the world for Islam and for Allah, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's very easy when you've been trained from birth to do that all you got to do is say, hey, ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate needs you. Because that was one thing that sold, is ISIS wanted to build a caliphate. Well, Islam has been under a caliphate for most of its, since the 5th or 6th century. As a matter of fact, the Ottoman Empire, 100 years ago, when the Ottoman Empire was fighting for the Axis powers in World War I, that was a caliphate. It was the Ottoman Caliphate, or the Ottoman Empire, controlled by Turkey. So, this is the mindset of them. So the vast majority of those over there are religious fanatics, but many did come for the money. And why not? Because they take over the oil from Iraq and Syria and those parts. They got tons of ways of coercing people. It's no different than, did you ever hear the story about where the term assassins and paradise came from?
I don't recall.
When the Mohammedans, the followers of Muhammad, were taking over the Middle East, they fought with the Arab nations, the 12 tribes of, who was it? The first son of Abraham, Ishmael. Okay, the Mohammedans were fighting the 12 tribes of Ishmael to take over the Middle East during the 5th and 6th centuries. And the Mohammedans, one sect of them, had a bunch of warriors, and what they did is they drugged them, and then they took them while they were drugged to this one huge castle in this oasis, and it had palm trees, and it had fruit, and it had all these women, and it had this, and they lied to them, and they said, this is paradise, and they kept them there for 3 days. And then they drugged them again and took them back, and they told these warriors, if you die in battle, then you will go back to paradise. And that's where the whole philosophy of paradise comes from, was this concocted thing, this oasis castle that they started taking some of their warriors to. Well, what they also did is they fed them hashish when they went into battle, so that they would be fearless and fight to the death. And they called them, I don't know the Arabic word, but the Arabic word is assassin. And that's where the original assassins came from. And it was their job mostly to go into the camps of the enemy and sneak at night and go into the tents of the leaders and assassinate the leaders. So this is, this whole thing about killing and takeover, and that's been forever, and it's part of their core.
Right. Well, now you have here, and they've been doing this for a while now, labeling these groups since the election of Obama. And of course, they keep bringing up, well, since the election of a black president, because they're trying to propagandize and say, well, these groups are racist and these groups are this and that they're dangerous.